Welcome back to Everywoman, where today we're discussing the billion-dollar fertility business. Deborah Spar, author of The Baby Business, is with us from Boston. And we're joined now in the studio by Marcia Inhorn, a professor of medical anthropology, currently at the University of Sharjah. Marcia, we've been speaking about the fertility business in the West. Is it thriving in the Middle East also?
Really, the IVF industry has made its way throughout the Middle Eastern region. For example, in Egypt, there are more than 60 IVF clinics in that country, and it is a costly industry for couples themselves. The average cost of an IVF cycle in the region is about $2,000 to $6,000 US, which is very prohibitively expensive for many couples. So yes, there is a large business in the Middle East.
Okay, well, let's look at that in a little more detail. For our next report, we went to Gaza, home to 1 million people and under siege since the beginning of the second Palestinian uprising in 2000. It's poor and overcrowded, but despite all of this, the business of fertility is thriving. Everywoman's Mariam Shaheen talked to Palestinian couples who've undergone treatment.
Gaza triplets Sarah, Ahmed and Huda are the latest of 5,000 test tube babies, born in one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Their conception came at great expense and brought much joy to this family of Palestinian refugees. Children play a central role in this society, and as Jamal Khawaja, the triplets' father, says,
It's very important to have continuity. The continuation of the bloodline of my father, my family, my country. This is our tradition. It's needed.
Dr. Tharwat El-Helu was one of the first to spearhead the effort to introduce in vitro fertilization treatment to Gaza over a decade ago. Since then, he has been the godfather of Palestinian miracle babies. Many, many miracle babies.
In our society, pressure on a couple to conceive begins immediately after the wedding. In the first 3-4 months, if there is no pregnancy, then there's pressure to get treatment. Although IVF treatment should be started 2 years after a natural try. We're always surprised when couples who have only been married for 6 months come to us for treatment. Otherwise, there's the threat of serious marital problems, including divorce.
But social acceptance of IVF treatment has been slow in coming. Raghda Khawaja has had 4 IVF treatments, 2 of which have been successful. She is mother to Noor, now 3, and her new 6-month-old triplets.
They call them the tube babies. They differentiate. They say they're not quite as normal as others. People put out rumors that tube babies were somehow ungodly creatures. But when they saw that many people were having test tube babies and that it had become a trend, it became more acceptable.
Although social concerns remain, IVF treatment has been sanctioned by religious leaders in Gaza.
Islam encourages medical treatment if the sperm is taken from the husband and the egg from the wife. Then there is no problem.
Islam, like all monotheistic religions, encourages procreation, and so does Palestinian society, which feels that significant demographic growth means survival. But amid the deepening hardship since Israel and the international community imposed its economic blockade, more than half the population of Gaza now lives below the poverty line. Today, only a quarter of those that would have previously sought fertility treatment can afford to do so. Yasser and Mahassan Sakka have been married for 15 years and fear a lifetime of ostracization if she doesn't conceive. They have borrowed heavily to finance this latest round of IVF treatment. In their case, the failure to conceive has been diagnosed as a problem with Yasser's sperm. Because of this, Mahassan has less fear of being abandoned if she remains childless.
It is very important, very important. Even my little nephew asks me, "Why don't you have a child? You have been married a long time. Why don't you have children?" He asked me that even yesterday. All the kids in the family ask, "Why doesn't Aunt Mahassin have a baby?" You feel awkward, even if you don't show it. Like me, I am brave, but there are moments when I break down.
يعني أنا جبارة شوية لكن إلا ما تنهاري وإلا يعني ما.
Not having children in a place full of them is a lonely fate, and it is not surprising that people will pay a high price, both materially and physically, to try to fill what many see as a social obligation.
Marcia, I think what that report clearly showed was that it is extremely important for people in the Middle East to have children.
It is extremely, that was a wonderful report. It covered many of the social issues facing both women and men in this region of the world. First of all, I would say the Middle East is a very child-centric part of the world. People love children. They're considered to be the joy of life. But then you get into issues of social identity, perpetuity, having your name passed on, your lineage in a very kinship-focused part of the world. And marriage, the Middle Eastern region is one of the most highly married parts of the world. More than 95% of people marry in their adult lifetimes, and with marriage comes parenthood. You're not expected to marry and not have children, and in fact the notion of the couple, the married couple without children, is not well developed as a social concept.
So how are fertility treatments seen in the Arab world? Are they seen as an acceptable way to go about trying to get pregnant?
The regulatory mechanism in the Middle East is really a religious one, and early on in 1980, soon after the first IVF baby was created in England, the Grand Sheikh of Egypt's Al-Azhar University came out saying it was okay to do IVF as long as you have sperm from a husband and eggs from a wife. If it stays within marriage, it's okay. And so with that, there has been a sort of social acceptance that this is an acceptable medical technology. Nonetheless, it's shrouded in secrecy still, because people have all sorts of fears about, will the child be taunted as a test tube baby? You know, will people think that there was a mix-up in the laboratory and that somebody else's sperm or eggs are used? And so there are still social acceptability issues lingering, although I would say it's changed over time in the last 20 years. It's become more socially acceptable to say that you're having an IVF baby.
And are there differences between Shia and Sunni as to how far reproductive technologies are acceptable?
Yes, and this is the most interesting thing that's happened really in the last 5 or so years. In Iran, the Grand Ayatollah Khamenei issued a fatwa, a religious decree, in the very end of the 1990s, saying that in his opinion it was okay to use donor egg and donor sperm, and that was the first such ruling in the Muslim world. And so in Iran you will find that indeed those technologies are now being practiced, donor technologies, and then this has also affected Lebanon among the Shia community there. So to my knowledge, the only two Middle Eastern countries where you can access donor technologies are Iran and Lebanon. They are at variance with the rest of the Sunni Muslim world, which strictly prohibits any kind of third-party gamete donation or surrogacy.
So have you found then that couples are travelling to parts of the region where they can get the treatment that they need?
Indeed, and I think this has been brought up earlier. There are women who literally will not ever conceive unless they use donor egg. They don't have good egg quality or any eggs at all. And similarly, there are many, many Middle Eastern men who have terrible sperm quality. Male infertility is a huge problem in this region of the world, and the only way that they will ever conceive is to use donor sperm. And there are couples who are Sunni Muslim couples, devout religious couples, who make their personal decision that they want to have a child badly enough, and that they will decide to go ahead and access donor technologies. And so when I was working in Lebanon, I found Syrian Sunni couples coming over to Lebanon, Egyptians coming to Lebanon, and it's my understanding that there is a reproductive tourism traffic going from the Sunni parts of the Arab Gulf to Iran as well.
Okay, let me bring in Deborah here. Deborah, is that a phenomenon in the West as well? People travelling, fertility travel, if you like?
Yes, it is. We're seeing a real growth of what many have called reproductive tourism. So Americans are going to South Africa, to Romania for cheaper treatments. A lot of Europeans are coming to the United States for treatments that they can't get in Europe. And I suspect that there are portions of the Middle East that may actually become centers for reproductive tourism, just as they're becoming centers for elective medicine more generally. So this is definitely a phenomenon we're seeing in the world stage right now.
Where do you think the fertility industry is headed?
The fertility industry is headed up. For sure. The demand is out there, and as we've developed these new technologies, we're just going to see the use of these various options exploding. And so if I had to pick an industry that's sort of most likely to develop over the next 10 or 20 years, I'd put fertility right at the top. And we haven't even really spoken yet about some of the genetic options that are also becoming increasingly available. And these involve allowing parents to select particular embryos to be implanted back into the mother's womb. And so these technologies in this market are really only going to expand over the next little while.
It's fascinating stuff. Deborah Spar, thank you very much for joining us. Marcia Inhorn, thank you for coming into Everywoman.
Thank you so much.
And that's the end of our special programme on the business of fertility. Now, we'd welcome your comments. Do email us at our website, aljazeera.net/English. From me and all the Everywoman team, bye-bye.